Hello everyone, and welcome to the latest episode of Vijf Vragen, or 5 questions as we would say in English. This is our podcast featuring the people of the NLintheUSA diplomatic network here in the US. Or, I should say, that's who we usually talk with, but we flipped the script this week a little bit. Instead of asking one person 5 questions, which, let's be honest, usually runs a few more than just 5, I'm asking 5 or 6 people a handful of questions. But these aren't just random people I stumbled across on my way in this morning. These people participated earlier today in the 2nd edition of Urban Dialogues in Detroit. That's right, I'm not even in Washington, D.C. as I record this. I'm a few hundred miles away in Detroit, Michigan for our latest version of Urban Dialogues. And what exactly are Urban Dialogues? Well, that's when we bring together Dutch and American experts to talk about the challenges facing our urban communities. We closely examine the dynamics of cities by focusing on fostering prosperity, promoting social inclusion, and strengthening resilience and environmental sustainability. I'm Jeff Allenak from the Embassy's Communications Office, and I'm talking with Vince Keenan, who is the Head of Innovation Engagement with the Mayor's Office here in the city of Detroit. Thank you for joining me, Vince.
Thanks for having me.
Well, let's jump right into it. What's your expertise, and what brings you to Urban Dialogues Detroit?
So I am with the Office of Mobility Innovation, which is a subdivision of the Mayor's Office. And our function is really to make sure that the city of Detroit is responsive to the needs of the automotive industry as it makes its transition and evolves into the mobility industry. There's a lot of that that's known and a lot of that that's unknown at this time, but the auto industry is our home industry here in Detroit.
Mm-hmm. It's Motown for a reason, right?
It's Motown for a reason. It's the Motor City.
Mm-hmm.
And it's incredibly important for us that while there is an opportunity for other cities, and they are actively trying to bring the mobility industry outside of Detroit, we want to keep it here, and we want to be the best place to come and innovate. And we put the world on wheels once, and we're going to put the world into mobility this time.
Now, for people who aren't familiar with the jargon mobility, what exactly do you mean?
Well, I think that's an evolving concept, and that's part of why we are at the City of Detroit. We're structured. The Office of Mobility Innovation is structured to be stealthy and to be able to adapt in terms of the way innovation and entrepreneurship works. As an example, we currently have passed a piece of legislation called a Transportation Innovation Zone. You are sitting in the middle of our Transportation Innovation Zone here.
Transportation and Innovation Zone?
Transportation Innovation Zone, our TIZ.
TIZ, okay.
It's a 2.2 square mile, sorry. Mm-hmm. I couldn't convert that to kilometers, but...
this is for an American audience, so we should understand.
Right, so 2.2 square mile portion of the city where we in the Office of Mobility Innovation have the ability to convene a set of relevant departments to look at new innovative projects that may not have precedent in other work that the city has ever permitted before. So, for example, if you come in with an electric unicorn that you would otherwise be trying to find your way through City Hall to see who would take ownership of that project, what we do now in Detroit is we say, look, we want to be a place where you'll come, where you'll try out your idea. If we're not familiar with it, we'll have a meeting where we collect all the relevant departments, we'll hear the pitch, we'll in that meeting come up with a path to permit, and then when you get compliant on what we talk about, we'll get your a TIZ permit so you can try it out. And the focus is really on safety. It's not about watering things down. It's more about respecting the innovator's time. And so you're not bouncing around City Hall to try and figure out how to permit something no one's ever permitted before. Mm-hmm. But it's also a focus on inclusion because we think it's critical. We got a lot of great opinions from Detroiters, the Motor City. The auto industry is in our DNA, and we're great at kicking the tires. And so what we also have is a requirement for engagement where we're working with the community and not doing a pilot that is an experiment on the community. So we're looking for those elements to come in. What we find is people are very receptive to that, and they look forward to that kind of feedback as well.
Interesting. Do you have experience working with the Dutch?
So I have visited the Netherlands, but this was actually the first opportunity that I had to work with the consulate and the embassy in terms of the problem-solving technique that was employed at the session today. And I thought it was fascinating, and we had some great discussion.
Have you ever participated in a similar discussion?
So I did personally. I'm trying to remember the exact details of it, but I had an opportunity in the post Katrina and Rita New Orleans. I met a number of people. I worked on a project with some folks that were local. I was here, but came down and I remember these kind of dialogues were part of the conversation there.
We called them Dutch dialogues.
Yeah. Yep.
But you were in Detroit at the time.
I was in Detroit. I had a friend. What happened there was really unprecedented, I think, in the United States. And when a friend called and said, "Listen, could you help?" I was running a nonprofit organization. They said, "Would you be willing to help do a community engagement grant, process a community engagement grant for us?" I said, "Of course, anything we can do," and it did fit within the mission of the organization. So that essentially we were a fiduciary in the beginning, but did give me an opportunity to go down and to meet a lot of people and get a really good sense of what it was. And then we did work with several projects through completion of the grant.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
What did you find most interesting about today's sessions?
So I think we had some great dialogue about our similarities, and then also some really interesting discussions about our differences. I would say, from a material standpoint, one of the things that's very similar is that I think we're dealing with a lot of the same issues in terms of weighing, like what we were talking about in particular in community engagement. We were trying to figure out how to weigh the sort of expectations of, people have a better sense of what they want than the obligation that they may have as participants in discussions. And so there's a sense, I think, on both sides of the conversation that if you have and I should say, that's not a problem, that's just human nature, right? But when you come in and you're talking about a community dialogue about how to come up with a solution, you do have to weigh, like, the difference between someone that has just shown up at this meeting and the difference between someone that has been following an issue for a long time, the difference between an elected official who actually has the responsibility to make a decision about what is happening, the developer. And so there's some real challenges in terms of how, I sort of look at it as currently we're at a time where engagement is it's a thing that people want to have done, but oftentimes it gets to be a check mark that people do, and then we forget about what happened there. And I think that one of the things every participant needs to do in those meetings is make sure that their contribution is as relevant as possible so that it sticks with the projects and the evolution of the work that's done. And so it's not just, I went to this meeting and I said it should be like this, and I'm mad because I didn't get what I want. It's actually more of the back and forth that you need to do in order to try and influence policy and decision making.
Well, thank you for joining me tonight, Vince, and I wish you the best of luck in your efforts to revitalize Detroit, and hopefully we can strengthen the ties between the Netherlands and Michigan more than they already are.
Absolutely. Well, I look forward to it, and thank you for the opportunity.
Great, thank you. And now I'm with my next guest, Rinske Brand, from Brand, the Urban Agency. Thank you for joining me today, Rinske.
Thank you for having me.
Let's jump right into it. What's your expertise and what brings you to Urban Dialogues Detroit?
Good question. My expertise, I would say that that is to connect the top down with the bottom up. Yeah.
What do you mean by that?
Yeah. I founded my business a couple of years ago, and our tagline is creating better cities for people with people. Because sometimes we forget that building cities is actually for the well-being of the people living in there. So you have a lot of development companies, municipalities working pretty top-down, and then you have the community working bottom-up. But as we are all making the same city, it's better to work together there. So that's connecting the dots and connecting top-down and bottom-up.
Okay, so it's urban planning and development, is that?
Well, I have a master's in art and culture studies, so I'm not a designer per se, but I see myself as a process designer. So maybe a little bit more social design.
Okay, social design. What's your footprint in the U.S.? Does your agency already do business here? Or are you looking to expand, or?
Not yet.
Okay.
I had some plans pre-COVID, but then COVID hit.
Messed up everything.
Yeah, pretty much. So not at the moment. I'm working throughout the whole of the Netherlands. I'm also a researcher. I'm researching the success factors of cultural and creative places, and that brings me to other countries. So there's going to be a book next year, fall 2024. Detroit and Flint will probably be in that book.
Oh.
So yeah, I hope that could be a launch of more international projects.
So the book, will it be about your experiences in both? You know, being here today, for example, or?
Not per se. I'm researching how to create cultural hubs, creative hubs. So there are a couple in Flint as well as in Detroit. And my interest now here in Detroit is finding out how they utilize our design culture to the regeneration of the city. So I'll be here for a couple of extra days, interviewing people, visiting places, driving up to Flint to hear the story there.
Okay, interesting. What did you find most interesting about today's sessions? You played many roles in today's session. You were I saw you on a panel discussion. You were one of the moderators.
Yeah.
So you were busy today.
It was a full day, definitely, yeah. What struck me the most was that when I came here, I thought we would see other challenges, and I was hoping to find solutions to the problems that we have in the Netherlands. But in the end, it seems that we are facing the same global problems, challenges actually, and we're all struggling with finding the right approach and finding the right solutions. But I think we have found some of the solutions. It's just the execution. So it was actually pretty good to see that we are struggling on both sides of the ocean and that we are working towards actionable solutions for that, but we're not there yet.
Is there one example that sticks out in your mind as a problem on both sides?
Yeah, when it comes to community engagement, there is what they call a community fatigue. So in the engagement, like municipalities and companies are engaging with a community, or actually I must say consulting. It's more like, we have a plan, what do you think, do you approve? Instead of really working with the community, really wanted to co-create with them. And yeah, we have that in the Netherlands as well. There is a lot of participation going on, and that feels a bit like we are having a party and we are just inviting other people to come along instead of organizing that party together, which is actually co-creation in a nutshell.
That's an interesting way to look at it. Instead of saying, come to my party, you're saying, help me plan the party together.
Well, actually, you're saying, let's organize a party together. Let's both decide on the music, on the drinks, on the nibbles. Let's do it together.
Now, does this more effective when you're trying to revitalize a community as opposed to somebody coming in, a developer coming in and buying 100 acres of farmland and
a greenfield? Yeah.
Yeah, because in a sense there is no community there.
You are absolutely right. That is a challenge. But even if you are transforming an already existing neighborhood, people, when they're asked, tend to look at the here and now. So they have challenges at that moment and they want that to be solved. But if you look at a development of a neighborhood, that can take like 10 or 20 years. So it's the individual needs versus the collective, but it's also long-term versus short-term. And you need to all take that into account. So yeah, but in a greenfield, there's nobody there.
And so some of the neighborhoods here, one I live in, it's taking 30 years to build out. So the people who were the original there, and there are still some, there's always a little bit of tension between the new residents and the older ones.
Absolutely, and we are now asking people in their 70s or 80s what they think about the future of their neighborhood. But we should actually engage with children from 5 years and older to ask them what they want for their neighborhood, because we are transforming that neighborhood for those people.
And what if they say we want roller coasters everywhere in Disneyland?
That's good, yeah. Well,
no, it's a very good point, because in some ways you're redeveloping for people who aren't even there yet. That's a big challenge.
Yeah, it is. And it is also about asking the right questions. So tell me what you want is probably not the best question to ask. Yeah.
What would be the right question to ask, do you think?
Depending on the situation, we normally start when it's an existing neighborhood. Could you tell me a little bit more about the history? What are the core values? Do you have a special anecdote about your neighborhood? So we start from there, building up the unique identity. And then we ask how the neighborhood works. What works well? What could be better? Are people missing stuff? And then you can come up with different scenarios, go back into the neighborhood, ask people what they think. Do they think that we made good scenarios for their challenges and their needs and desires? And you can work from that.
Well, thank you for joining me today, Rinske. And best of luck to you in your efforts to find American partners to continue building the relationship between our two countries.
Thank you so much.
My next guest is Rich Fahle, who is Head of Partnership here at Newlab. Thank you for joining me today, Rich.
Absolutely. It's great to be here.
Well, let's jump right into it. What's your expertise and what brings you to urban dialogues in Detroit?
Expertise, that's an interesting word. Well, I will tell you that I work at Newlab, where there is a thriving innovation community. We have about 50 to 60 startups that work here in our building. And at the same time, we're working with various government organizations, civic organizations, communities, VCs, et cetera, to sort of bring together a system that helps accelerate innovation across the world. So obviously I was interested in helping Urban Dialogues because we're in the middle of a thriving city here, and we're a big part of what's happening as it grows.
So those startups, do they rent space here?
It's not necessarily a rental agreement, but they actually, in some cases, just have a desk. In some cases, they're leveraging larger space where you do get into sort of rental arrangements. But it's a community of startups that all sort of come together to not only help each other, but to help accelerate their own scaling.
So then is the hope then that they eventually move out and do their own?
Well, that's not only the hope, that's what happens. I mean, we have some companies that have not only, they've either exited in sales or they've grown to Series B or even C, and then they move out and have to move into their own facilities, which is exactly what we hope to happen, and that's why we were put on this planet, to help these companies scale, move more quickly, find ways to pilot their technologies, and to basically integrate into the communities and cities that they serve.
Series B and C, what do you mean by that?
Series B and C is just a level of funding for your company. As you're growing, you start as an early seed or an early stage company. You may have some single investor or even some company that helps accelerate your initial prototyping or maybe a model, or help you build out your idea. As you get a little further along and you start to pilot or find new potential clients and partners, they start to invest. You might have some venture capitalists that invest money in, and that's a Series A, which is that first level. And then Series B, you're moving into much more serious execution of your company, and you're moving into hundreds of millions of dollars at that point.
Oh, nice. And then C, I guess you're much more advanced than that, and you're probably moving out at that point.
At C, you're not only moving out, but you have a thriving company, and you're on your way to becoming probably either a company that's going to exit with a sale of some sort, or move into publicly traded territory, or keep growing.
Okay. Do you have experience working with the Dutch?
I do, mostly through the Netherlands General Consulate in Chicago, but I also have 3 of my 4 children living in the Netherlands right now. I have 2 in Amsterdam that attended the University of Amsterdam, one who's working in The Hague every day and living in Amsterdam, and another one who is at Erasmus University in Rotterdam and has been there for 5 years.
So they're grown children.
They're all in their 20s, yes, and they love the Netherlands, and we visit them there often. It's much more inexpensive for my wife and I to go visit them than it is for me to bring them all home all the time. So we visit them quite a bit.
Have they picked up Dutch along the way? Can they speak it?
They have picked up Dutch. In fact, it's impossible to live there for as long as they have without
picking up Dutch. I think that you can live in the Netherlands without speaking Dutch, but it's not the way that they want to live in the Netherlands for sure.
Okay. What did you find most interesting from today's sessions?
I mean, bringing together not only people from the Netherlands, but people from my home city of Detroit was really invigorating. The ideas that we talked about around mobility and community consultancy and engagement and other areas were really exciting. It's areas that I live in every single day, and to get perspectives from not only other countries like the Netherlands, where I find we have so many similar problems and challenges, but also from people from my own city that I haven't interacted with before, to hear new viewpoints is energizing for me. It's one of the reasons why I work with Newlab. I love the exchange of ideas. That's how things move more quickly and how we can accelerate change and innovation.
Is there one thing that sticks out to you from today's sessions, whether it's a problem or a solution or?
I mean, our cities and countries are different in a lot of ways, obviously, and I think in some ways the Netherlands is more advanced in some areas than the United States, and in other areas I think the United States is doing some really advanced things. But what I found today that was fascinating to me is how similar some of our challenges are. I mean, over and over at every table, when some of our Dutch visitors would talk about the problems that they're facing, some of the things that they're dealing with, some of the hurdles or blocking points that they're facing as they work through new challenges, they're the same things that I'm dealing with here, that some of the neighbors that I worked with in these workshops today are dealing with. There is so much common ground. Mm-hmm. There's definitely differences, but there's more common ground I found than there are differences.
And that common ground ultimately brings us closer together.
Absolutely. I mean, to think about the ideas together and to think about how, especially when you look at some of the micromobility solutions that are happening in the Netherlands, not just with bikes and e-bikes, but with other form factors of movement and mobility, an area that I'm really passionate about. To hear how, while it looks amazing, that there's still challenges that have to be met. And then as you think about the touch points where people move from a bike to a bus to a train, those areas that are really problematic here in my home city of Detroit.
Not just Detroit, but even where I live, even in D.C.
It's super challenging, I know, in D.C. as well, but to see the way that some of the Dutch government has come together with some of the civic organizations and cities to help solve some of those problems is really inspiring.
Well, thank you for joining me this evening, Rich. And best of luck to you in your efforts to revitalize Detroit and bring the Netherlands and Michigan just a little bit closer to one another.
Well, you know I love that. I have my 3 kids there, but I absolutely appreciate the conversation.
Great. Have a great night.
You too.
My next guest this evening is Peter van Oorschot with TNO. Peter, how did I do with that last name?
That was pretty good, actually.
Was it really?
Yeah, the SCH was good.
It always gets caught in my throat. Thank you for joining me tonight, Peter.
It's a pleasure being here.
Well, let's jump right into it. What's your expertise, and what brings you to Urban Dialogues Detroit?
The expertise is around urban mobility and built environment. Within TNO, we have several groups looking at all kinds of technology, and we look at innovations in those technology fields. And one of them is societal impact in cities. And it's our interest to see what the impact is of all kinds of interventions into the cities and what kind of impact that has on transport, on the lives of people, on air quality, on noise, everything, and equitable kind of conclusions that you could draw from those interventions. And that all comes together today at SUDS and at Urban Dialogues.
Now, is that what TNO does? Just that, or what,
no,
is it broader? What?
It's one of the things. I mean, we have 6 units, and it goes, we're 5,000 people, and we're an applied technology research organization from the Netherlands. Mm-hmm. In 6 units, that goes from defense, IT, health services, and we're in built environment, or mobility in built environment.
When you say built environment, what do you mean?
That's cities, basically.
Okay. Oh, instead of like the natural environment. Trees and
exactly
meadows.
Everything that you build. So
okay.
That's infrastructure, also bridges and whatever, but also cities and buildings and everything around it.
Okay. So it's man-made versus nature.
Yeah, exactly. And we combine that with mobility to see how people interact with the built environment.
Then mobility, is it simply just how people get around the cities?
In the cities, regions, and states, and how people get around, yeah. How you go from A to B, how you move from home to work, recreational, everything that you do. And then all kinds of modes that you could use to do that. That's for the people, but you also have goods that move from A to B, right? The logistics part. So that also uses the same infrastructure. So we look at that as well, and they typically make use of the same kind of infrastructure at the same time. So we need to know how they interact and where the bottlenecks are, how you could solve things. And we look at all those complex issues to see where the solutions are.
So do you actually do the building, or do you do the advising cities how to do it? Or is it a little bit of both?
Well, at TNO, we look at innovation, so we get it really from the idea, we do the research, and then we develop all kinds of solutions and products around it. But we also do all kinds of research, so qualitative research, but we also sometimes build products around it. And one of the products that we've been building is called Urban Strategy, and it's a platform to run scenarios of interventions into that built environment from all kinds of angles. And we match, let's say, the data that you have and do analysis, but we visualize that, but we also add models to it so that you can predict what will happen in that environment. So that way we call it predictive digital twinning. You have a lot of digital twins that actually have the data and you can visualize it, but by adding the models and all kinds of smart algorithms later on to it, you can actually move it into predictive digital twinning. And we do that with cities around the globe to actually help them out to see what the impact is of all kinds of changes that you want to make.
Does TNO have a footprint in the U.S.? Do you have many partnerships with U.S. partners?
Getting started, yeah. We're big, obviously, in the Netherlands as a Dutch institute, but and in Europe. Growing in Asia, we're in Singapore and Japan, and currently looking at Korea as well. And with this urban strategy platform, we're also looking to expand into the US. And one of the projects that I am here for is in San Diego, where we're building a digital twin for the city to actually do all the things that I've just been talking about regional development, for housing units, for businesses, for the livability of the city of San Diego.
You know, we're going to have an urban dialogue session in San Diego in a few months, in February, I think.
Exactly, that one's next. And and that's the nice thing, it's about San Diego and Tijuana together as a twin cities, so that'll be very interesting.
Being an East Coast boy, I always forget how close those two cities are to one another.
Yeah.
But one of my colleagues explained it to me one day during lunch. There are people in Tijuana who shop in America, and then they just go back and forth like all day. It's really almost like one community. And,
yeah,
and
exactly.
I never thought about it in that way.
And also the other way, right? So for Americans, they actually go to the vet in Mexico because it's faster and cheaper and everything, and healthcare
like
and stuff.
A veterinarian, you mean?
Veterinarian, yeah. Yeah, so
for
it's stuff like
care.
that. So it's one big city.
I never realized. What did you find most interesting from today's session?
Most interesting is to see that a lot of the issues that they are looking at here in Detroit are very comparable to the ones that we have in the Netherlands. But there are also many differences, right? And Detroit is a weird kind of city, really, because with the history and the way it's spread out and all these neighborhoods that are more or less spread out over a larger area, to get them all combined and to work together is a big challenge for them, I think, to get that to happen. But one of the things that I saw today, there's a lot of, let's say, focus on sustainability and making it equitable for all people in the city. Those are all the good things.
From the American side or the Dutch side?
No, from the American side, you see that. So there is a will to make that change and the desire to look for solutions in that area. Mm-hmm. But it's really, really hard to look at it holistically and look at it from all angles at the same time. And today I heard several times that they run into that problem. They're looking at it from one angle, so from the mobility side or from the equitable side. But how do you combine that into one solution that works good for efficiency, good for the companies, good for the city, and good for all parts of society?
Well, thank you for joining me today, Peter. And best of luck to you in your efforts to find American partners for TNO to continue building the relationship between our two nations.
Thank you very much. It was nice being here, and I really look forward to doing more business here in the U.S.
And my next guest today is Olga Stella, who is here in Detroit. Thank you for joining me today.
Thanks so much for having me.
Well, let's jump right into it, Olga. We'll start really easy. What's your expertise, and what brings you to Urban Dialogues Detroit?
Well, I'm the Vice President for Strategy and Communication at the College for Creative Studies, and in that role, I lead all of our public programs at the college, ways that we work with the community and really help more people see the value of art and design and artists and designers in Detroit, and just very happy to bring that expertise to the discussion today at Urban Dialogues.
Okay. So the college, is it a specifically for urban design, or is it a university?
No, so the college is a nonprofit, private art and design school that it spans all disciplines of visual design. We don't have a program in architecture, but we do, teach everything from studio art to user experience to transportation design. One of our public programs in the college is an organization called Design Corps Detroit. And Design Corps is really a public-facing economic development organization that works with designers in the community and helps support their growth. It also is the holder and steward of Detroit's UNESCO City of Design designation. So there's a lot of community engagement and really a strong, both within our classrooms through classroom projects that we do with nonprofits and companies, but also in these public programs like Design Corps, just a strong interaction around the issues relating to Detroit's revitalization.
Okay. Do you have experience working with the Dutch?
Through their visits and through the last few sustainable urban design summits.
Okay.
When Design Corps was looking at the UNESCO City Design designation, there was quite a bit, this was slightly before my time, but quite a bit of conversation with Eindhoven, around the way that they'd really use design as an economic driver in their city. So that was very inspiring to us.
What does that design, what are you, I'm having trouble catching what you're saying. UNESCO design?
Yeah, so Detroit is a UNESCO City of Design.
What does that mean?
So UNESCO, which is the United Nations Education, Social, and Cultural Organization, organizes a Creative Cities Network. And that Creative Cities Network spans 7 different disciplines of creativity, from design to music to gastronomy and others. And there are I think over 44, almost over 50 cities around the world, in North America, Europe, the global south, that have been designated cities of design. And so we've all pledged to use design as a driver for sustainable and equitable development in our cities. And in Detroit, Design Corps, which is part of the college, went after and sought that designation for the city and has been the steward of it. And so it's organized a wide variety of activities, programs, and really embraced inclusive design as the kind of key focus for our designations work here in Detroit.
Is that designation something that Detroit had to apply for or work for?
Yeah, we're the only U.S. city to be designated.
The only one?
The only one. And it's somewhat of a badge of honor, but it's also because we bring something unique to the global design scene. In many cities, design is seen as a luxury, something that's elite, for only for some people. And in Detroit, part of what was so attractive to the other UNESCO cities of design when they were looking at our application was really the ways that grassroots people embrace design and the role that has in community revitalization.
So do you know what the UN found so interesting about Detroit compared to?
Yeah.
I don't know if any other American cities even tried, but.
Yeah, no, I think there have been other U.S. cities. I'm not privy to what all those applications might have been before us. Unfortunately, we left UNESCO, the U.S. left UNESCO at one point in the last presidential administration, and is now back in. And so who knows? There might be future U.S. cities to join
Okay.
the network. But our fellow, so the Creative Cities Network is a really strong collaborative network, as there's a lot of international exchange and a lot of kind of working together on projects and sharing best practices. And what our colleagues in the other cities, many of which were European cities, what they found so interesting was really this. In their communities, the government is driving a lot of policy decisions and driving some of the discussion around what is the role of design and development. But in Detroit, it's very much coming from a grassroots perspective. And so how to navigate that, what does that look like? What are the pluses and minuses of that approach? I think all of that was very interesting to them.
Okay. What did you find most interesting from today's sessions?
Yeah, I thought it was great. We talked about community engagement, inclusive mobility, and neighborhood design, and there was just such a strong thread across all three of those about what does it really mean to listen to people on the ground who have lived expertise but might not have credentialed expertise, and the challenges that different organizations, entities might have in really understanding how to tap into that. I thought that was a very interesting thread in all of the conversations that I participated in.
Is there one thing that sticks out in your mind from them, whether it's a shared challenge or a common solution?
Yeah, I think that for the most part, people really wanted to figure out how to tap into it. But maybe just didn't have their own experience in how to do it, And
what do you mean?
And tapping into real resident participation and engagement. Often when we talk about community engagement, it's really very one way. It's consultative. We're providing 3 options. Which of these 3 options do you like?
What if the answer? Sometimes the answer is none of them, right?
Right, and then we don't really know what to do, like how to deal with that. And a lot of what we were talking about today was really about co-creation, and that can be really scary because it feels like, well, is it going to slow my project down? Will it make my project cost more? And I think we had a very good discussion in each of those 3, on those 3 themes around really, well, what are the benefits and what are some experiences that different people in the room might have had in doing it and doing it well, and then also just recognizing there could be challenges based on the context. And in the Netherlands, there might be certain things that might be different kinds of impediments to this kind of work than in the U.S. In the U.S., we might also have some other challenges that wouldn't be in the Netherlands. And so, just really sharing that out, I thought was very interesting and gave me a lot to think about.
Okay. Well, thank you for joining me today, Olga, and best of luck to you in your efforts to revitalize Detroit.
Thanks so much for having me.
My next guest is Ivana Kalafatic from Detroitisit. She is the organizer of the Sustainable Urban Design Summit, of which Urban Dialogues was a subset of. Am I saying that right, Ivana?
You got it.
Well, thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
Let's jump right into it. What's your expertise, and what brings you to Urban Dialogues Detroit?
Yeah, so I don't think I have an expertise. I'm just a curious human. And I am prone to thinking about strategy first. So what I've mostly made my career off of is strategy. And it happens to now be, and has been for many years, in communications strategy. And I just iterate it in different methodologies or through different methodologies and different platforms. I've had media as part of my ecosystem within my career for, I'm not going to say how many years, but many. And I started in print with a publication that was very well established within the design space, where I became very well acquainted with many Dutch brands and design and furniture brands.
What was the name of the publication?
Clear Magazine.
Clear Magazine.
So it was a based out of Detroit. We had offices in Milan, New York, and LA. And it was an internationally distributed publication out of the city. We had all, I know it doesn't sound sustainable, but we had all plastic issues. We had transparent front and back covers. we were really pushing the boundaries. We had heat-sensitive inserts that we were producing with the magazine. We
Pushing
were
the boundaries of design, of what a magazine
design
means.
publishing. We won, I don't know, 27 design awards with it internationally. Philippe Starck designed our covers. Marcel Wonders designed our covers.
Wow.
Campana Brothers designed our covers. Karl Lagerfeld. Again, I'm now dating myself a little bit, but we were really integrated within all of the design worlds into fashion. We did a lot with fashion weeks and design weeks in the Netherlands and in Miami. We were one of the originating media partners of Design Miami in the early 2000s. So we've been or what I've been doing, I've been around for a minute. Within knowing where quality lays, and I always had a tendency towards the Dutch. I think from an aesthetic perspective, from an approach to design and a holistic approach to design, I appreciated that. So in a couple of years afterwards, so around the middle of the teens, 2000, around 15, I decided to start a digital media platform by the name of Detroitisit, which is the originating partner to the Dutch with Sustainable Urban Design Summit, now in its third year. Mm-hmm. And
it's a little spooky. You're reading my mind of the next question I was going to ask. So
I'm
just going to let you talk.
A little spooky. Mm-hmm. No, well, let's have a conversation.
No, you. My next question was going to be, how do you go from a magazine to Sustainable Urban Design Summit? and the middle is Detroitisit. So please keep talking.
Well, listen, I've been moderating this conference all day today, and it's been about transition, so maybe it's rubbing off. But I'm thrilled to really be here. This is really great that you're doing this, and I'm really, truly, honestly thrilled. Our whole team is to be partnering with the Dutch on this opportunity, because I am seriously a huge believer in Dutch perspective and approach to strategy around design and to application around design and process around design. And I'm a big believer in design, period. I think that proper design solves a lot of problems. So where we started thinking about sustainable urban design and bringing in the Dutch, this was like a no-brainer. So a couple of years ago, with our media platform, I had a conversation with one of your former colleagues within the government on seeing as literally a cocktail napkin idea, could we align forces between the Netherlands and Greater Detroit and have a one-day or multi-day, but an experience within Detroit to bring in the expertise of the Dutch within the design sustainability space, align it within the expertise of Detroit, and do what is now 3 years later, the summit that we had today, which we've been hearing, we're thrilled to say, has been greatly, wonderfully received on all ends, both speakers, over 33 speakers that we had today and more, with urban dialogues, of course, that the Dutch were running, and we had, I just got a count for my team, 620 plus people that were in the building today.
There were 620 people here today.
Yeah, through this event. We had 2 TV stations that were here today that were filming. We had 12 exhibitors. It was just through the roof. It was incredible.
Really grown over the past couple of years.
Yeah.
It's the third one, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, sometimes the best ideas start out on the back of a napkin.
I agree.
So that does...
Which is, by the way, excuse me, most of how I have led my career, off the back of a napkin.
Well, you never know when the good ideas are going to come to you. You have to write them down fast, right?
Right.
So that you've answered my next question is, do you have experience working with the Dutch? And you do.
I do. And I'm a big advocate, truly. There's something about the approach and about the mindset. So a couple of your colleagues today asked me what I think about the difference between maybe, I think they were probably getting 2 personality approaches to questions on some of the panels. In other words, the difference of personality is a generalization Dutch and generalization maybe Detroit or US. And yeah, you know, every culture has differences, and that's the beauty of being a global world that we live in, which I think was also part of the beauty of doing something like what we did today, that we were able to bring a global world of perspective to Detroit. But you know, U.S. or Americans are usually and this is not anything I'm saying that's new, open and congenial and, inquisitive and thought-provoking in a way, or looking to kind of prod you, whereas the Dutch and many other cultures might be a little bit more reserved, or they might need a little bit of probing to open up, and once they do, it's a complete world that opens to you. And what I find with the Dutch is that there is a rigor to the way that the Dutch approach topics and experience around the work that they do that appeals to me, and that I think is very interesting, and it's a nice juxtaposition for the conversations we had today.
What did you find most interesting from today's sessions?
And I really think that's a great question. So Detroit is vast. It's about 160 square miles.
How many residents?
And within proper Detroit, it's 620 to 50,000.
Comparable to Washington, D.C. I always hear there's about 600,000 there.
I think, and I think they're around the same. Yeah, because Washington is, so Washington is also considered with its suburbs as well as is Detroit. So there's a large ecosystem of suburbs around Detroit, but proper, it's around 620. And, when you look at where, with the Dutch, and I was actually putting out a statistic today, I think 17,200,000 or so population of Dutch,
that's
approximately.
What I hear.
Of course, there's no comparison with Detroit and the Netherlands, population-wise, but when you're looking at such a density factor with the Dutch and the Netherlands, as opposed to the vastness of space within a city like Detroit, there's so many interesting dynamics that happen, and yet you're talking about the same topics because, as I said, we're humans first that occupy a geography that we happen to live in. How do we end up making that home ours is really, I think, a goal for all of us, I hope would be for many of us. So what is it that we can learn from the Dutch from a density perspective slash land use perspective slash equity perspective, as well as the Dutch learning from Detroit? Detroit has a lot of challenges with racism that are deeply embedded, inequality, of course, that are deeply embedded, figuring out what topics like equity means within a city like Detroit and many other cities. And then you have conversations with Dutch where you wouldn't think that has a different, mostly homogeneous, but not necessarily population. As of the last few years, absolutely, it's less homogeneous. But when you have the words like diversity within equity, within urban development, you wouldn't necessarily put that into the same context as the Netherlands as you would within Detroit. So having a similar context but fairly different perspectives on it, or realities rather on it, is, I think, an extremely interesting output of what today brought about for both sides.
Interesting. Is there one thing about the Netherlands that if you could wave a wand that you would bring to Detroit and say, this is what we need?
Yeah, I would say to me the most interesting thing that came out of it, as you asked me, and I'm now just answering a question. The number of social housing and
housing.
Yeah, and how that relates to a population within certain cities from Eindhoven and similar, and how can that be applied, that let's say almost like a foundational base to a city like Detroit or many U.S. cities that are challenged with social housing. The problem within the States is that it's not mandated through the government. It's something that ends up happening as a request for developers to follow through some sort of a city, let's say ordinance or ask, but it's not necessarily mandated. So this is something that's very interesting to consider, and this is also why I think, and we received a lot of comment on that today, this holistic approach that we took to strategizing around who's going to be on the panels, from policy within state level to city level, to execution of startups, to finance and development. So it was an amalgamation of speakers that were on these panels to help answer potentially, or get to, not answer, but get to looking at opportunities for solutions on topics like, for example, social housing. How does the Dutch do it as well as they do?
So what do you mean by social housing? Is it like subsidized housing or affordable housing?
Subsidized and affordable housing.
Affordable,
yeah.
okay.
Yeah. So here now in Detroit, there's a percentage of housing that is being requested from developers or neighborhoods.
Required or requested?
It's not required.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're asking of it.
There are some jurisdictions, I know in Montgomery County, Maryland, they require, if a developer
Detroit,
comes.
I'm talking, yes. I don't know about other, I'm
Right,
sure.
right.
Yeah.
So there are some, I'm from there, so I'm familiar
Sure.
at least a little bit. If a developer wants to come in and build X number of houses, then that county requires X number of them to be affordable to a certain level. But it's not all of Maryland. The
Yeah.
county I live in doesn't
Yeah.
require that.
Yes.
Yeah,
So those are, when you're looking at 160 square miles, it's a huge amount of space. And really the downtown Detroit is heavily invested in when you consider other neighborhoods. But as we had on the last panel with East Side Community Network, these are nonprofits. A lot of these organizations are nonprofits that are doing what you think would be potentially also influential policy, but city-based work, and they're being funded through foundations that are also somewhat selective with where they're putting their funding in. So it's maybe to the outside a discombobulated way of doing almost policy in a reversed way, whereas the city and the state, potentially like when you look at the Dutch, there's a rule and a regulation that's put into place for a mandate of probably, I don't know this, but certain amount of green space or certain amount of housing that needs to be mandated for certain areas. That doesn't exist here.
Not in Detroit.
No.
Wow. Well, that's all we have time for today. Thank you for joining me tonight, Ivana. And best of luck to you in your efforts to revitalize Detroit and find Dutch partners to continue building the relationship between our two nations.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
And to our listeners, thank you for tuning in. Please tell us what you think in the comments below, and be sure to click on the subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next episode or the other videos we post on our YouTube channel. I'll be back behind the microphone next month with a member of the Dutch Diplomatic Network in the United States. Until then, you can keep up with our work on any of our social media channels: Facebook, X, Instagram, or LinkedIn. Just search for NLintheUSA and you can stay up to date on how the United States and the Netherlands have a partnership that works.